Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky just dropped a bombshell warning that could change everything we thought we knew about the upcoming Trump-Putin summit. While the world prepares for what could be the most consequential diplomatic meeting of the decade, Zelensky is sounding the alarm. Putin isn't preparing for peace, he's gearing up for war. This isn't just diplomatic posturing. This is Ukraine's president who has access to intelligence that most of us can only dream of, telling the world that Russia's leader is about to pull off one of the most audacious diplomatic deceptions in modern history. And it's all happening as Donald Trump gets ready to sit down with Vladimir Putin in Alaska this Friday.
Well, you're looking at territory that's been fought over for 3.5 years with, a lot of Russians have died, a lot of Ukrainians have died. So we're looking at that, but we're actually looking to get some back and some swapping. It's complicated. It's actually nothing easy. It's very complicated, but we're going to get some back. We're going to get some switched. There'll be some swapping of territories to the betterment of both. But we'll be talking about that either later or tomorrow or whatever.
The meeting itself represents an unprecedented moment in diplomacy. This marks Putin's first visit to the United States in a decade, and remarkably, the first time a Russian president has set foot in Alaska since it was sold to America in 1867. The location choice is strategic, just 55 miles from Russia and outside the jurisdiction of the International Criminal Court, which has issued an arrest warrant for Putin. Trump has indicated that territorial adjustments might be part of the solution, suggesting there could be some kind of arrangement that would benefit both sides. So what exactly did Zelensky reveal? And why should this meeting terrify anyone who believes in a peaceful resolution to the Ukraine conflict? To understand what's really at stake here, we need to dive deep into the intelligence that's got Ukraine's leadership so concerned. According to Zelensky, Ukrainian intelligence and military commanders have been tracking Russian military movements that tell a completely different story from what Putin is presenting to the world.
The path to peace for Ukraine must be determined together and only together with Ukraine. This is fundamental, and it's important that our joint approach and shared vision work towards real peace, a consolidated position, a ceasefire.
Although he doesn't have a seat at the negotiating table for now, Zelensky has the support of European leaders rallying behind him. They're standing firm on the position.
The Ukrainian president has been adamant that any path to peace must include Ukraine at the negotiating table. He's been working with European allies who have issued joint statements emphasizing that Ukraine cannot be sidelined in decisions about its own future. Yet despite this international support, the fundamental concern remains that Russia and the United States might attempt to decide Ukraine's fate without Ukrainian participation. While Putin talks about peace and prepares to meet Trump, his forces are doing the exact opposite on the ground. Reports from Ukraine's military indicate that Russia is actively redeploying troops and military equipment in ways that suggest preparations for new offensive operations, not a wind down toward peace. This isn't just standard military rotation or defensive positioning. Ukrainian officials are seeing movement patterns that historically precede major assault campaigns. The most concerning developments are happening in the Zaporizhzhia region.
I wish you good health, dear Ukrainians, men and women. Right now in Zaporizhzhia, our rescuers, medics, police officers, all the services are providing assistance after a strike by Russian bombs. Air-dropped bombs on the city, on ordinary residential buildings, on the bus station, on one of the clinics. Unfortunately, there are victims. Everyone is receiving assistance.
Just recently, Russian forces launched devastating attacks on the city, with bombs hitting residential buildings, bus stations, and medical clinics. Emergency services have been working around the clock to save lives as civilians continue to bear the brunt of these assaults. Ukraine's military spokesperson for the Southern Front, Vladislav Voloshin, has confirmed that Russian forces are repositioning units specifically for further assaults in this strategic area. This is the same region that has seen some of the most intense fighting of the war, and it's strategically crucial for both sides. If Russia can break through Ukrainian lines here, it could potentially cut Ukraine's forces in half and threaten multiple major population centers. But here's what makes this intelligence particularly alarming. The timing, Putin knows he's about to sit down with Trump, a president who has made ending the Ukraine war a top priority and has threatened severe economic consequences if Russia doesn't agree to a ceasefire. Any rational leader preparing for genuine peace negotiations would be scaling back military operations, not ramping them up. The fact that Putin is doing the opposite suggests he's playing a much more sophisticated game than most observers realize. Zelensky's assessment is that Putin views the Trump meeting not as a genuine peace opportunity, but as a personal victory lap that he can use to buy time and international legitimacy while continuing his war effort. The Ukrainian president believes Putin plans to present the meeting itself as evidence that he's a reasonable leader willing to engage in diplomacy, regardless of what actually gets accomplished in the room. This would allow Putin to tell his domestic audience and international supporters that he's pursuing peace while simultaneously telling his military commanders to prepare for expanded operations. It's a classic authoritarian move. Use diplomacy as a shield while sharpening your sword. The intelligence picture becomes even more disturbing when you consider what Russia has been doing beyond just troop movements. Ukrainian sources indicate that Russia has been stockpiling ammunition and supplies in forward positions, the kind of logistical preparation that typically precedes major offensive campaigns. These aren't the actions of a military preparing to stand down. These are the actions of a military preparing to escalate. What makes this situation particularly dangerous is that Trump appears to be walking into this meeting with fundamentally different expectations than what Putin is actually planning. The American president has been pushing for what he calls territory swapping.
Because there'll be some land swapping going on. I know that through Russia and through conversations with everybody. To the good, for the good of Ukraine. Good stuff, not bad stuff. Also, some bad stuff for both. So there's good and there's bad. But it's very complex because you have lines that are very uneven. And there'll be some swapping, there'll be some changes.
Trump has acknowledged that Russia has occupied what he describes as very prime territory, including valuable oceanfront property. He's noted that Ukraine has lost most of its 1,000 miles of coastline, except for a small area near Odessa. The president has expressed frustration that while Zelensky had constitutional approval for war, he now claims to need constitutional approval for any land swaps as part of peace negotiations. Trump has indicated he'll assess the parameters of a potential deal, but may walk away if an agreement isn't feasible. But Zelensky's intelligence suggests that Putin has no intention of giving up any territory. Instead, he's preparing to take more. This creates a scenario where Trump might think he's negotiating a reasonable compromise while Putin is actually using the diplomatic process to mask preparation for expanded aggression. The Ukrainian president's warnings become even more significant when you consider the broader strategic context. This isn't the first time Putin has used diplomatic engagement as cover for military preparation. In fact, it's become something of a signature move in his playbook. Before the 2022 invasion, Putin engaged in months of diplomatic discussions with Western leaders while simultaneously building up the massive military force that would eventually invade Ukraine. He used those diplomatic contacts to argue that he was seeking a peaceful resolution to tensions, right up until the moment his tanks crossed the border. Zelensky clearly believes Putin is following the same playbook now. The Russian leader engages with Trump, presents himself as reasonable and willing to negotiate, potentially even agrees to some kind of temporary ceasefire or limited arrangement, and then uses that breathing space to regroup and launch even more devastating attacks. From Putin's perspective, this strategy makes perfect sense. He gets to reset his relationship with the Trump administration, potentially getting some sanctions relief, or at least a pause in military aid to Ukraine, while buying time to address the logistical and personnel challenges that have plagued Russian forces throughout the conflict. A temporary ceasefire would allow Russia to bring in fresh troops, repair equipment, and potentially even negotiate for the release of captured Russian soldiers. All of this would strengthen Russia's position for future military operations. But there's an even more cynical calculation at work here. Putin understands that Trump desperately wants a foreign policy victory, particularly one that involves ending a major conflict. The Russian leader can use this desire to his advantage by offering Trump something that looks like progress while actually setting the stage for expanded conflict down the road. If Putin can get Trump to agree to some kind of framework that legitimizes Russian territorial gains or limits Ukraine's ability to defend itself, he'll have achieved through diplomacy what he couldn't accomplish through military force alone. The implications of this intelligence extend far beyond Ukraine's borders. If Zelensky is correct and Putin is indeed using the Trump meeting as cover for military escalation, it could fundamentally reshape the conflict in ways that make it much more dangerous for everyone involved. A Russian offensive launched after diplomatic engagement with the United States would send a clear message to other authoritarian leaders around the world. You can engage with democratic countries diplomatically while simultaneously preparing to attack them militarily. This would represent a complete breakdown of the basic norms that have governed international relations since World War II. It would signal that diplomatic engagement itself has become weaponized, turned into just another tool of warfare rather than an alternative to it. The consequences could ripple far beyond Europe, potentially emboldening other aggressive regimes to use similar tactics in their own regional conflicts. China's approach to Taiwan, Iran's regional ambitions, North Korea's nuclear program, all of these could be influenced by how Putin's diplomatic deception plays out in the current crisis. But perhaps the most immediate concern is what this means for Ukrainian civilians who are already bearing the brunt of Russian attacks. If Putin is indeed preparing for new offensive operations, those operations are likely to target not just military positions, but civilian infrastructure as well. Russia has consistently targeted Ukraine's power grid, water systems, and transportation networks, causing massive suffering for ordinary Ukrainians. An escalated Russian offensive would almost certainly mean more attacks on these civilian targets, potentially causing a humanitarian crisis even worse than what Ukraine has already endured. Zelensky's warning also highlights the fundamental disconnect between what different parties want from this conflict. Trump wants an end to the fighting and a foreign policy victory. Putin wants territorial gains and the weakening of Ukraine as an independent state. Zelensky wants his country to survive as a sovereign nation with its territorial integrity intact. These goals are not just different, they're fundamentally incompatible. This incompatibility creates the perfect conditions for diplomatic deception. Putin can tell Trump what he wants to hear about peace while telling his military commanders what they need to hear about war preparations. He can present himself as reasonable to international audiences while presenting himself as strong to domestic audiences. The challenge for Trump is that he's walking into a negotiation where his counterpart may be operating with completely different objectives than what's being discussed publicly. The Ukrainian president's intelligence assessment also raises serious questions about the wisdom of meeting with Putin without including Ukraine in the negotiations. Trump has indicated that he's willing to meet with Putin one-on-one without requiring Zelensky's participation. From a diplomatic standpoint, this might seem efficient, two leaders sitting down to hash out their differences. But from a strategic standpoint, it's potentially disastrous. Ukraine is the country that's actually being invaded. Ukrainian forces are the ones fighting and dying. Ukrainian civilians are the ones being bombed. Excluding Ukraine from negotiations about Ukraine's future is not just diplomatically questionable, it's morally problematic. It suggests that Ukraine's fate can be decided by other powers without Ukrainian input, which is exactly the kind of great power politics that led to this conflict in the first place. Moreover, excluding Zelensky from the talks makes it much easier for Putin to misrepresent Ukraine's positions and willingness to compromise. Without Ukrainian voices in the room, Putin can claim that Ukraine is being unreasonable or unwilling to make necessary sacrifices for peace. He can present his own territorial demands as reasonable compromises while portraying Ukrainian resistance as stubborn obstruction. This dynamic could easily lead to Trump pressuring Ukraine to accept terms that are fundamentally unacceptable, potentially setting up Ukraine for blame if the peace process fails. The timing of Zelensky's warning is also significant. He's not waiting until after the Trump-Putin meeting to raise these concerns. He's raising them now, before the meeting happens, in an apparent attempt to influence how Trump approaches the negotiations. This suggests that Ukraine sees the Alaska summit as a potential turning point that could either lead to genuine progress toward peace or provide Putin with exactly the diplomatic cover he needs to escalate the conflict. By going public with this intelligence assessment, Zelensky is essentially trying to prevent Trump from being manipulated by Putin. He's warning the American president that his Russian counterpart may not be negotiating in good faith, and that any agreements reached might be used as weapons rather than foundations for peace. Whether Trump will heed this warning remains to be seen. The American president has invested significant political capital in the idea that he can personally negotiate an end to the Ukraine conflict. He's presented himself as uniquely capable of dealing with Putin, and he's made ending the war a centerpiece of his foreign policy agenda. This creates pressure for Trump to come away from the Alaska meeting with something that looks like progress, even if that progress is more apparent than real. The danger is that Putin understands these pressures and is prepared to exploit them. He can offer Trump symbolic concessions or temporary arrangements that create the appearance of diplomatic breakthrough while actually strengthening Russia's strategic position. A temporary ceasefire that allows Russia to regroup, a prisoner exchange that benefits Russia more than Ukraine, a framework agreement that legitimizes Russian territorial gains. Any of these could be presented as diplomatic victories while actually making the underlying conflict worse. Zelensky's warning also reflects a broader Ukrainian concern about the direction of American policy under the Trump administration. While Trump has maintained military aid to Ukraine and has threatened Russia with economic consequences, he's also suggested that Ukraine may need to accept territorial losses as part of any peace agreement. This position is fundamentally unacceptable to most Ukrainians.
Ukrainians will not give their land to the occupier. Ukraine is ready for real solutions that can bring peace. Solutions that are against us, solutions that are without Ukraine, are simultaneously solutions against peace. They will not achieve anything. These are dead solutions.
The Ukrainian people have made their position crystal clear. They will not give their land to the occupier. 75% of Ukrainians oppose any territorial concessions to Russia, and such concessions would violate Ukraine's constitution. Zelensky has warned that accepting a partition would only invite future aggression, stating that where there is a second partition, there will inevitably be a third. The Ukrainian position is that any peace agreement must include strong security guarantees that prevent Russia from simply regrouping and attacking again in a few years. Without such guarantees, a ceasefire becomes just a temporary pause that benefits Russia more than Ukraine. Putin gets time to rebuild his forces while Ukraine remains under constant threat of renewed invasion. From Ukraine's perspective, this isn't peace. It's just delayed warfare that favors the aggressor. As we watch the Alaska summit unfold, Zelensky's warning provides a crucial lens for understanding what's really happening. If Putin does indeed view this meeting as a personal victory rather than a genuine peace opportunity, then the real test will be what happens in the weeks and months following the summit. Will Russian military activities scale back in ways that suggest genuine preparation for peace? Or will they continue the patterns that Ukrainian intelligence has identified as preparation for new offensives? The international community will be watching closely for these indicators. Satellite imagery, communications intercepts, and other intelligence sources will all be scrutinized are signs of whether Putin is following through on any commitments he makes to Trump, or whether he's using the diplomatic process as cover for military escalation. European allies, in particular, will be looking for evidence of Russian good faith, as they've been skeptical of Putin's intentions throughout this process. The stakes of getting this right could not be higher. If Zelensky is correct and Putin is indeed preparing to use the Trump meeting as cover for escalated aggression, then the Alaska summit could mark the beginning of a much more dangerous phase of this conflict. Instead of winding down toward peace, the war could expand in ways that threaten not just Ukraine but regional stability throughout Europe. On the other hand, if Trump can somehow navigate Putin's potential deception and emerge with genuine commitments to peace, the summit could indeed mark a turning point toward ending one of the most devastating conflicts of the 21st century. The challenge is distinguishing between real progress and diplomatic theater in a situation where the stakes are measured in human lives. As Trump prepares to sit down with Putin, Zelensky's warning serves as a stark reminder that in international diplomacy, things are rarely what they seem. The Ukrainian president's intelligence assessment suggests that Putin may be playing a much more sophisticated and dangerous game than most observers realize. Whether Trump can counter that game, or whether he'll inadvertently become part of it, may determine not just the future of Ukraine, but the future of international order itself. The world will be watching Alaska very closely this Friday.